Welcome everyone. Welcome to the ESAA webinar series. This is our last one for now, and we'll take a break over the summer. We'll be back in the fall. So we thought we'd end with something fun. So we have our good friend Brian Keating back, and Brian and I will be spending, it's probably going to be a little bit more than an hour. We got a lot to cover. We're trying something new. We have videos this time as well, as long with pictures. So we're going to do Birds of Alberta Birds, and with my photos, Brian's stories, some interesting facts and information. And just before we get started, Site has sponsored our entire series, so thanks to them. And our good friends over at Trace Associates are sponsoring today to make this happen. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian to start, and then we'll go from there. And a reminder that the webinar recording will be available afterwards on our webinar site at esaa.org/webinars. So Brian, we'll turn it over to you. You can give us a little preamble of what we're going to do today.
Well, thanks, Joe. I just wanted to just talk about the fact that birds have been a part of my life since I was 12 years old, when my mother noticed that I had an interest in nature, and she got me a secondhand pair of binoculars, which I have long since lost. But I have to say that my binoculars are the tool of choice wherever I go, and it's opened up the whole world in a sense. Binoculars allow you to see like a falcon, and it gives you a chance to see the twinkle in the eye of the robin on your front lawn, and those are experiences that I think are to be cherished. We live in a beautiful province that has so much to offer, and with our COVID restrictions on travel, what a pleasure to be able to focus on our own backyard, literally, and perhaps our province. I was just up in the Lesser Slave Lake area last week on a birding trip, and the week before I did a morning trip down to Frank Lake just south of Calgary, another very active birding location. And what a pleasure it is to get out there and explore. The opportunity to check birds out, it's sort of like a puzzle, and this complicated puzzle that you eventually get more and more familiar with. Eventually you know how the pieces fit together, but it's such a beautiful challenge to try to figure out what you're looking at or what you're hearing. The trick, of course, is to always be with your binoculars. And one of the ways that I figured out at a very early age how to do that is to carry the binoculars on your belt. I've got a little binocular pouch here, so when I'm out camping, even if I go to the outhouse, my binoculars are with me. I prop the door open, have a seat, and let nature perform in front of me. So binoculars, number one, most important tool. Now, Joe has picked up a camera to add to his binoculars, and that's what we're going to be experiencing now.
Yes, thanks, Brian. And I'll add that until about 3 or 4 years ago, I could cared less about birds. Traveled with Brian multiple times, and all of a sudden, I'm a bird person. As Brian says, there's only 2 types of people, right, Brian?
That's right. What are they? 2 types of people in the world, Joe. There are people who bird watch and those who will become bird watchers. There you go.
The tools that I also add to my repertoire is I have on my phone a Merlin Bird ID, which you can take a photo of any bird you see, and it'll tell you 99% of the time what it is. And the other one is the eBird app to record your things and help citizen science, so that they can keep a track, and it creates a nice map around the world of the species of birds and where they're at. So first, rough estimates that current research puts the number of bird species in the world at 10,000, of which Canada has 685. And Alberta has 435 species, including 129 accidental or vagrants, the ones that you hear on the news that shouldn't be here but occasionally show up because they get their radar mixed up or they get blown off course. And we also have 8 introduced species into Alberta, and most birders don't like them.
Yeah, there's definitely a negative relationship, especially with birds like starlings and house sparrows that have really taken over the landscape and have invaded and taken over hole nesting birds like bluebird boxes and so on.
And there's approximately The estimate is somewhere between 200 and 400 billion birds in the world. The most common is our chicken wings, so that's 20 plus billion birds. And the rarest is the Madagascar pouchard duck, which is less than 50 in the wild.
Yes,
Which is,
and the domestic chicken, of course, came from the jungle fowl of Asia. And so the genetics come from a wild stock, but that's they've been interbred and created all kinds of different groupings of domestic chickens.
so we've broken up the presentation into 3 sections. There's a video in each section. So we have small birds, waterfowl, the shorebirds, and some other birds, and my personal favorite, the large birds and raptors. So we're going to get started with the small birds. So first we have the beautiful white-throated sparrow with its lifespan for a small bird of over 14 years.
Yeah,
Brian.
Well, this is one of my all-time favorite birds because it's such a good singer. It's one of the birds that brings a smile to my face when I hear it in the spring. It's the one that sings "Oh Canada, 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 Canada." It's a beautiful, beautiful call that permeates the morning air with such a wonderful clarity. Just last week up in Lesser Slave Lake area, and then I went over to Cold Lake, we were accompanied by the white-throated sparrow singing the whole way. They're a native species of sparrow. I think we've got this negative feeling towards sparrows, and I think that's because of the house sparrow, which is the introduced European component of our sparrow collection. But there's a number of native species of sparrows, and I think the white-throated sparrow is the one that's represented in a beautiful way.
Yeah, and I would add that I'm always shocked when I find one, saying what is singing so loud, and you find this tiny bird and you're like, how can it sing so loud? It's amazing.
How's that?
Good. Here's one of Brian's favorites, and you'll see him in the video coming up, is the house wren. And it weighs less than 2 quarters sitting in your palm of your hand.
Yeah, they are such a tiny animal with such a big voice. And they usually start in the spring, if you have one around your house, calling. They usually wake you up at around 4:45 in the morning. They've got a lot to say. I guess when you're that small, there's lots to talk about. And they're full of energy. They are insectivorous. They are nonstop feeding on the smallest of insects in your backyard. When they do nest, sometimes they nest in odd locations, and I'll show you that in my video. But they tend to fill up every cavity in the vicinity so that other house sparrows won't come in and take over that particular terrain. So they just use sticks and they fill up other cavities in a given backyard. But the one that they want is the one that they make into the nest, and that keeps competitors out of their territory. The Baltimore Oriole, which until probably, I don't know what, in the last 20 years has become more common in Alberta. It used to be more of an eastern bird, but it's made its way here, and you can see the photo. This one was from the Ellis Bird Farm. He's balancing, and if you look carefully, you can see the spider web, and he's waiting for somebody to come by for a snack. So he's done that. And interesting thing about the Baltimore Oriole is, unlike other birds, it's very picky about the fruit it eats. It only eats ripe fruit that is dark color. Oh, and then on the other side, we have the American goldfinch, which is the strictest of vegetarians for birds. I was in Sylvan Lake just the other day, Joe, and there was a tree in a friend's backyard. She feeds birds throughout the summer. The tree looked like a Christmas tree with American goldfinches as the ornaments. There was probably 15 American goldfinches. They are so brilliant, so yellow, so beautiful, and they have such a cheery voice. I hear them flying overhead often. Once you cue into their call, you really discover how abundant they are. When they are down towards the ground and you get a chance to see their color, it's pretty exceptional. A number of years ago, we had a big sunflower head in our backyard, and an American goldfinch was hanging on the sunflower head, plucking sunflower seeds out. And I swear the color of the goldfinch matched the colors of the the plant itself. It was just amazing. The sunflower petals were the same color as the American goldfinch. The Baltimore oriole is one of my all-time favorites. I spent a number of years out east. I spent from age 6 to age 17. I grew up on the East Coast, and we had good numbers of Baltimore orioles. That's where I first got to know them. They have such a beautiful liquid call. I ache for the sound of a Baltimore oriole in the spring. And I usually find them in the cottonwood trees along the edge of the Bow River when I'm biking early in the morning. I saw my first two maybe about 6 weeks ago when they first arrived back into Alberta, calling and singing from the treetops. Very special birds. They build a nest that's shaped like a teardrop that hangs from high branches. And so very, very creative nest that's very interesting. And now and again, you're lucky enough to come across one.
Only ever seen one, so. I'm gonna leave these for you, the warbler family. There's so many different types of warblers, so I picked 3 that are kind of unique.
Oh, these are excellent, excellent warblers. And that's what I was doing all last week up in Lesser Slave Lake, was trying to identify warblers. I came across about a dozen species. If I was really good with my warbler calls, I probably would have identified another dozen after that. But we saw good numbers of yellow-rumped warblers, yellow warblers, and several orange-crowned warblers. The yellow-rumped warblers seem to be very successful this year. Virtually every other one that we saw had a beak full of food. It was obviously feeding youngsters. But I was talking to the head of the Boreal Forest Conservation Observatory up at Lesser Slave Lake, and she told me that this spring has been a bit of a catastrophic failure for most of the warblers because it's been so cold. When a female is sitting on the eggs, she eventually has to go and feed herself. Normally, she would just take off and feed for X number of minutes and then come back to the eggs, but the problem was the temperatures were so cold, the youngsters didn't survive. They're in the process right now, though, of double clutching. So they'll probably be very successful, but they had a rough start because of the cold spring. These birds are up against so much. Their migrations are long and arduous, and but they have so many challenges when they get here. The yellow warbler is one that I've heard as lately as a few minutes ago when I was out in my backyard. It's the one that sings sweet, sweet, sweet shredded wheat. And once you pick up on that song, you hear it everywhere you go in the right habitats. Fantastic. And the orange crown warbler, that's a tricky one because the orange crown is very hard to see. Usually you don't see it unless you're holding the bird in the hand. So a tricky bird, a very thin, wispy call, but once you pick up on the call, they're quite a common bird. The warbler group essentially represents a group of birds that are the real jewels of North America birds, and they nest mostly further north in the boreal forest. At least that's where the most species are, because Canada's good in the springtime with bugs, and that's what these guys need to survive.
If nobody's seen a northern shrike, also known as the butcher bird, you need to find one and find what they do with their prey. We're talking about a bird that's the size of a sparrow, right?
Yes, or maybe probably closer to the size of a robin, but yes, small. It's a wannabe hawk, that's what I call it.
You'll see it hovering in the field, sitting on telephone wires, and it will catch its prey and then impale it on barbed wire fences and leave it there for everybody to see to remind them I'm in the neighborhood.
And apparently, if you're a male logger-headed shrike, the thing to do is collect many insects and many mouse spits and hang them on the thorns of, let's say, a rose bush or a barbed wire fence, and it's there to attract the girls, because then the girls know that he's a good hunter. I actually witnessed a northern shrike take a mouse down in southern BC and decapitate it, and then hang the body on to a barbed wire fence. And it was the first time I had encountered a shrike that was feeding. They're remarkable. You can see the hooked bill on that bird is quite significant, and that's the best that they can do to approach what a bird of prey can do.
And I believe inside their mouth, they have some kind of sharp tooth on the upper and lower bill, I was reading, that helps them with the decapitation process and impaling process. So they've evolved for a very special, unique living.
Yeah, they're an amazing little predatory bird. Yeah, you're right. They're a little bigger than a sparrow, a little smaller than a robin.
Yeah. The next bird you've probably heard. It's probably one of the only birds that actually calls its name. It says Phoebe, Phoebe, Phoebe.
Yeah, and they were incredibly abundant up towards your neck of the woods, Joe, in Edmonton and north up into Lesser Slave. These birds consistently nest on man-made structures. So they'll nest on the tops of outside lighting structures or underneath an eave of a house. We saw quite a few nests. We saw quite a few Phoebes last week, and all of them were feeding young. It looks like they're going to have a very successful year.
And also, according to Cornell University, the Phoebe was the first banded bird in North America in 1804 when Audubon attached a silver piece of thread to its foot, and he recorded it returning the next year. So that was our first banded bird.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Brian, one of your favorites?
Well, this was one of my childhood birds, Joe. And, you know, when I see birds like the catbird, it just brings me right back to when I started birding at age 12. The catbird was one of the first birds that I identified. And your photograph here, Joe, is a rare photograph because it uniquely captures not only the black cap on the top of the head, but look at the orange underrump. That's distinctive of the catbird. And the catbird is one of the reasons why I appreciate it so much is that, yes, it does sound like a cat. It has a call, but it also has a repertoire that rivals the mockingbird in its ability to mimic other birds. And as the bird grows older and older, it memorizes more and more songs. So the better songster they are, the more attractive they are to the opposite sex. And there we are, right back to the whole basis of biology there, Joe. It's all about reproduction. And these guys, their song repertoire is designed to attract the girls. And the older they are, that means their genetics are better. That means their health are better. They got a low parasite load because they can live long and learn lots of songs.
And the catbird is one of the mimic birds. One of the other mimic birds that'll surprise people is the beautiful STELLER'S jay. It can mimic birds, squirrels, dogs, chickens, and mechanical objects. And it's pretty unique to our part of the world in the mountain areas of Canada, the Yukon, Alaska. And it was discovered by the same guy, I believe, his last name was Steller, who discovered the Steller eagles and the Steller sea lions.
There you go. Fantastic. Yeah. I remember searching for a red-tailed hawk that I knew was in a spruce tree down in southern British Columbia one year, and out flew a STELLER'S jay, mimicking the call of a red-tailed hawk perfectly. Interesting birds, and of course they're a corvid, not COVID. They're a corvid, and which means they're in the crow and jay family. And as such, they're very smart birds. They can put 2 and 2 together and come up with 4 awfully fast. The interesting thing about these birds and their blue color, that's not pigment in the feather. That's actually blue by refraction. So the blue is in the STELLER'S jay feathers are the same blue, and for the same reason as the sky is blue. It's scattering of light. All the light is absorbed except for the blue, and that's what we see.
Well, and I think them and the blue jays are one of the only crested birds in North America, the crested type birds, I think Cornell said.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, I know there's a titmouse that has a crest. And
okay, there's not many.
Yeah, no, that's right. There's not too many crested birds.
Okay, and we're going to finish off our small birds section, I believe, with, if you haven't ever seen them, go find them. They're absolutely stunning. The mountain bluebird, once extremely endangered, now thanks to people like the Ellis Bird Farms making a comeback. So in the bottom right, you have an adult male, and then you have a female with her blue wings in the top left. And then below you have 7-day-old chicks that I was lucky enough to be at the right place at the right time last year at the Ellis Bird Farm, and my wife and I were lucky enough to trail along and band birds all day. So And Brian, do you want to add anything about the bluebird?
Well, the bluebird is around these days because of people, like you said, like the Ellis Bird Farm, who promoted the concept of the bluebird trails. And a good friend of mine runs a bluebird trail. Actually, and over the years, I've known several people who have had their own bluebird trails where they set up 2 sets of bird boxes side by side. One is always taken by a tree swallow, and the other is always taken by the bluebird. So you can't put one box out and expect a bluebird to take it. Probably it will be taken by a tree swallow. Tree swallows will never nest side by side. They'll keep other tree swallows away, but they don't care about the bluebird who's nesting next door, in the box next door. That's why you often see pairs of bluebird boxes. But the bluebird trails that have been set up all over North America for different species of bluebirds have been incredibly successful. And of course, their downfall was because of the introduced starling that was introduced into New York around 1885 and has spread throughout North America and the Caribbean ever since, to the tune of some 2 billion birds. And starlings are hole nesters, and they create all kinds of issues by taking over other birds that make and utilize holes. And that's where my video comes in. So Joe, if you'd like to move us.
I'm just going to add before that.
Short video here on backyard birds.
Yeah.
So this is what you can do to put together to bring some birds into your backyard.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add before I run the video that the mountain bluebird, unlike all the other birds, you would think him being so colorful is the reason she's attracted to him. No, it's because he's chosen the best location for a nesting box. It's based on location, location, location. It has absolutely nothing to do with how colorful or how well he sings or anything else. He's found the perfect home for her and her chicks. So that's a really interesting fact I learned when I was researching them for this presentation. So we are going to try this video. So let's hope this works. There might be a lag for a second while we get it running.
That's perfect. Okay, this is a unique situation where I put up a Malawi sun mask, a mask that I bought when I was overseas in Africa, and a wren started to take over right away. You can see it looks like the mask is chewing on a stick, but that's a wren trying to get an oversized stick through the mouth. Wrens aren't good with spatial understanding, I don't think. Eventually, the wren figured it out, built a nest inside, and I started to do some interesting photography here. You can see he's carrying a smaller stick right now, and he's holding onto the nostrils, and then he goes into the mouth with that stick. He built a beautiful little nest. You can see some of the sticks sticking out through the nose just above. I like to think of that as nose hairs in an old man. But here he is feeding now youngsters on the nest. And back in and out, it looked like my Malawi sun mask was spitting birds. And there he is carrying out a fecal sac. He's cleaning the nest, keeping it clean. So he goes in with an insect, feeds the youngster, gets a fecal sac, and leaves the nest. And the fecal sac is kind of nature's way of putting poop into a natural Ziploc bag to get to have the parents get rid of it. Now, flickers nest in my backyard too. This very nest box, this is the first year I put it up. As I'm speaking right now, right behind me, there's a flicker nest in the same box with probably a half dozen young. But this is the first year my box was used. And I filled it full of wood chips because the flickers like to excavate their hole, and this allows them to bond to the nesting box. So I filled it full of wood chips, and he started to go in, and right away he started chucking out wood chips, one after the other. So I put one in slow motion here, and you'll see how he's chucking these chips just like there, right there. Dunk, look at that. It was like a frisbee that he was throwing out, and he cleaned out the whole box to impress the girl. And there's the girl standing nearby, waiting for the male to go ahead and set up the nest. So here we are, going right inside, still flicking chips out. Eventually, they were sitting on about half dozen eggs, and I've been successful several summer seasons since, including this year. Now, my buddy Kevin, we noticed we had a video camera set up on an osprey nest platform, and I built that nest platform years earlier. I had NMAX come in and put in the pole for me. Then they put up a camera, and we noticed that garbage. garbage was collecting on the nest because the osprey will pick up human garbage and deposit debris as part of the nest building structure. And we were worried that the wind was going to blow some of this garbage, like that black plastic bag, onto the eggs and suffocate the eggs. So we did a cleanup detail job. And you can see we even picked up a child's mitt up on the nest. It was unbelievable.
Okay, we're done.
So the osprey was just nervously hovering up above.
Good job, Kevin. A good operation, smooth.
Good operation, smooth.
Brian, I'd love to see the hair of this kid.
So we found all kinds of stuff in that nest. But what a pleasure it was to see success. And this year I put up a nest box down at the end of my yard, and I had a golden-eye duck take up the nest box. She's on the nest as we speak. And so every year something new happens, and it's quite exciting. I'll show you another one later on, Joe.
Yeah, speaking of golden eyes, I'll have to send you something that we found yesterday in one of the Kestrel boxes. I'll leave that as a surprise for now.
Okay.
So next up, we have waterfowl and shorebirds and others. As Brian once told me, there's 3 types of birds in the world. There are little birds, big birds, and ducks. So here we go. Everybody has a favorite duck. This is my favorite. I call them the little tank. They're a small duck with the most, if you ever get to see one, they have so much personality. I think they must have modeled Donald Duck after this, because this guy is Mr. Personality.
Yeah, the ruddy duck is amazing, and often they're very approachable. They have this wonderful display, and Joe, you captured it so well with this photograph. The males put on this display for the girls. You can see his tail is straight up. He does this wonderful little series of pumping noises with his face and his neck, and he does a little spurt, doesn't he, Joe, with his feet?
Yep. And then he blows bubbles.
Yeah, little bubbles. That's right. It really is a remarkable bird. You know, Alberta is blessed with an array of nesting habitat for ducks, and the duck speciation is really quite remarkable. Early spring, when the ducks are migrating in, to go to some of these potholes that are just outside of the cities, and to spend some time with a spotting scope especially, or even with just your binoculars, it's a real visual treat.
And the ruddy ducks have been around for about 11,000 years, the research says. So they're quite the characters. One of my favorites. Always enjoy seeing them. Next up, everyone's probably seen them. Whether or not you've seen one of their ugly chicks is another story. So, and surprisingly long-lived, considering how many birds of prey like coot. So they live over 20 years.
That's interesting. And talk about birds of prey. My wife and I were down in southern BC maybe 2 years ago at a place called Duck Lake in the Creston Valley, and we watched it was in the winter, about 200 coots that were all together, and all of a sudden they started to mass together and push tight. And we looked up, and sure enough, a golden eagle was hovering over the group, and the golden eagle was waiting for an opportunity to pluck a coot from the pile, and they were all diving into the water and on top of each other, safety in numbers. It was really quite remarkable. But Joe, you took me to a site in Edmonton and introduced me to some of my first little baby coots, and I remember as the parent bird was gathering food and feeding the youngsters, they were doing this little ridiculous display with their wings, and this begging display that was just one of the most downright cute things I've ever seen. And a coot is not really a duck, it's actually a rail. Its toes are not webbed, they've got lobes on their toes to allow them to paddle along. So they're closely related to Sora rails, clapper rails, Virginia rails. The coot is just the most common of all the rails.
And you were telling me why they believe the chicks are not like other chicks and stand out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, well, yes, the color is an attention-getting device to get mom to feed it, and so the more colorful the chick, apparently, the more often they're fed, and the coots will sometimes produce more youngsters that it seems that they can feed, and the ones that are the most colorful and brightly colored are the ones that seem to get preferential treatment.
And unfortunately, the sad part of nature, and I've seen it, is coots have a lot of chicks, and the ones that won't survive, she will drown. She will hold them underwater. It's if she can't support them, she'll get rid of them. It's
fortunately, it wasn't like that in my family, Joe.
no, yeah, we'd both be in trouble.
Yeah.
So next is the hooded merganser, a rare sight. I don't rarely see them. They hunt underwater by sight and can change the refractive properties of their eyes so they can see better underwater. That is a cool adaptation.
Yeah, and they're a predatory bird too. They feed on aquatic insects and fish. A friend of mine managed to get a photograph of a hooded merganser this spring on the Bow River eating a crayfish. And crayfish have only appeared on the Bow River in the last few years. They've been introduced from the Beaver River area up to the east of Edmonton, Joe. And the crayfish now is common in the Bow River waters. And apparently the hooded mergansers are loving it. They're feeding on that new invertebrate opportunity. The hooded merganser, we see them in Calgary in spring migration. There still are hooded mergansers around, I'm sure, but we had a good year this year for hooded mergansers, and I think they're one of my favorite. They've got a bill that is covered in these little ridges on the inside that help them hold the fish that they catch, or the
it's like a swordfish, sawfish bone. Yeah, same with most of the merganser family.
Yeah, that's right.
Next is the common merganser and her family. She carries them on her back. I think she's one of the birds that is prettier than the male. It's with her punk rock hairdo and her bright beak, and she's quite the character.
Yeah, I call the female the Phyllis Diller hairdo bird. Fantastic. And Joe, that's an incredible photograph that you've managed there to get those youngsters on the back. It's such an endearing behavior with the red-necked grebes, and I know you have a picture of one coming up. It's been suggested that the mergansers and the grebes use their backs as an artificial nest. Or a mobile nest to allow their youngsters to get up and rest as they maneuver around. Mergansers are common. I think I've seen more this year than I've seen in most years. They're hole nesting birds, so they nest up in the trees. They produce an awful lot of young. And so when conditions are good, the mergansers do well.
Next we have the grebes. The grebes that you can mainly, you'll find them in Alberta. Top left, the white guy with the beady red eyes is the western grebe. The right one is the redneck grebe, or as I call him, the Alberta grebe, and her little chick on the back. And once again, you'll see the bright red spots next to the eyes. The hungrier the bird is, it's been reported, and I pretty much can verify that if the chick's hungry, those are red. She goes from chick to chick and looks at them. If they're brighter color, she feeds the one with the brightest color first. She goes to the hungriest one first. I have video from last year watching an egg hatch, and within an hour, the chick was on the back of mom. It had managed to get enough energy to crawl onto mom's back and hide in under her feathers to keep warm. The evil looking underneath that, eared grebe, and then next to that is the horn grebe. If you don't know, the interesting thing about all the grebes is you'll watch them feed feathers to their chicks, and they'll eat feathers themselves, and it's to line their stomachs and create a plug. And that plug is then somehow the stomach wraps it around the bones of the fish they eat, so it doesn't rip their intestines when they have to go to the bathroom. So you'll see them right away, right at young, feeding their chicks downy feathers to line their stomachs. It's one of those crazy adaptations of nature.
Wow, I'd never heard that, Joe. That's fascinating. I remember years ago when I worked down in southern British Columbia at a wildlife center down there in Creston, on a wet night, a migrating western grebe landed on an asphalt road that must have looked under the moonlight as the surface of a pond. Their legs are located so far back that they need, like a loon, they need to run across the surface of the water to get airborne. So they have to take off from a water environment. big enough to allow them to get airborne. And this western grebe landed on the asphalt under the moonlight on the wet asphalt, and it was unable to take off. And we came across it and picked it up and kept it till the next day and then released it in the pond. But I'll never forget holding that bird and looking into those blood red eyes. These are stunning birds that we take for granted, but they're unique and highly adapted for their insect and fish eating capabilities. The western grebe has that remarkable dance that it does, where it goes up, both the male and female go up on their and skim along like a sea-doo on the water as they dance, and with their necks virtually in perfect tandem. A wonderful behavior, which I've only rarely seen. You've got to get on to ponds where western grebes exist early in the spring when they've got the hormones going to do that dance. And the redneck grebe is one that we hear all the time on the lakes at this time of the year. They're very common. And the other two grebes, the eared and the horned grebe, I've often seen in roadside ditches, right beside the gravel roads of our prairies.
Yeah. I think we were going to play our next video then with, I think we were going to play it a couple slides ago, but since we've been talking about baby birds, we are going to go to our next video. And I think this was in Brian's backyard.
Yeah, I put this nest platform up last year in hopes of attracting a goose, and it worked. Yes, this was just a few weeks ago, Joe. After 29 days of incubation, 3 of the 4 eggs hatched. And these little platforms, I just happened to be working in my office where I'm sitting right now, and I had my bathroom window open, and I heard the excited calls from the adult ducks. And I ran over, and there it was. I grabbed my video camera, and there she is. Now, only 1 egg failed to hatch. And you can see it right there. You can see one that's been hatched, but one is whole right beneath her. And I think she was waiting here hoping it would hatch. It never did. I believe that it either wasn't fertilized or it died when 2 nights in a row we went down to -9 before she started to sit on the eggs. She obviously lays a clutch like all waterfowl do. They lay all the eggs first before they sit on them because they want to have simultaneous hatching. And that way she can get them all safely away. So watching these little ducklings, I only had about an hour to videotape this before they left the nest, and you can see how this little guy is climbing under for some warmth. Joe, you got some beautiful photographs of other birds with this, that grebe you just showed now, but the warmth can go underneath. And then I was lucky enough to get the final check. You can see what they just bail off. That was 10 vertical feet at first. They just walked right off. Mom got a little nervous about what's going on. Slid down the male was down on the ground waiting for the 3rd one to arrive. And there it is, joined by number 3. Now you can see the male is limping. And this was quite interesting because right from the start, the male had a broken leg. I believe it's probably a compound fracture of the femur. And yet he stuck with the whole nesting process, defending the nest when he needed to. You can see there, he was waiting on the ground for the youngsters to come. There's mom, looking healthy. These are the babies just minutes after they left the nest. And feeding on some of the vegetation. It didn't take them long. They started working their way towards the river right away. As they went, they started sampling the grass. So that's the chicks' first opportunity to eat in their whole life. And then finally, oh, you can hear a falcon in the background. That was the local neighborhood bird. And watch the babies. Look at this. All the way down, head over tea kettle, falling, and I put it in slow motion here just to show you a close up. Just these little birds. What a rude start for birds like. And they're sitting there a little disoriented, but nonetheless they're almost down in the water, encouraging them to come. Here she is. And there's their very first taste. Very first. And what a pleasure to be able to see that. So thanks for getting that up there, Joe. That's great.
You're welcome. Next is the forester's tern. A lot of people see them, think they're called the common tern, and as I was talking with Brian, I finally figured out how to tell the difference. So the forester's tern, which is I think more common than the common tern, has the black tip. The other one doesn't have a black tip on its beak.
Yeah, the common tern has a blood red bill all the way down, and so does the Arctic tern too. So, but we don't here in our province of Alberta, we don't have the Arctic tern. So when I see terns, I just assume common terns.
Yeah.
So
just
thanks
look
for
at any marsh anywhere out in the countryside, you'll find these guys hunting and diving in ponds along with the black terns.
Yeah, they're amazing, actually. And terns in general are amazing. Their bodies are so sleek. They've got a very large wing to body ratio, so that they have a very buoyant flight, a very efficient flight. Of course, everybody's heard about the Arctic tern. It sees more daylight hours than any bird in the world because it migrates from the Arctic all the way to the Antarctic. Every year for the last 15 years, I've been doing trips down to the Antarctic, and I see our own Arctic tern in their non-breeding plumage. They've got an all black bill in their non-breeding plumage. I see them down in the Antarctic. So here's a bird that flies from one polar area to another polar area and then back again, taking 3 months to do the flights each way, spending 3 months in each location, making up the year of travel. They're incredible birds.
Next, Brian, I'll leave this one to you because we added this in at the last minute. So,
well, Gavin Fitch, who I know you're watching right now, emailed me maybe a week ago and asked me about this bird. He had seen lots of them on the Bow River. They're a fly-catching gull, and you usually don't think of gulls as being fly catchers, and you usually don't think of gulls as being this beautiful because everybody's biased towards gulls and what they look like. But the Franklin's gull is one of the real stunners. They're like the Bonaparte's gull, which looks very similar, but the Bonaparte's nests far to the north. The Bonaparte's migrates through here as well in the spring, but these guys are the ones that stick around the Alberta and the Edmonton region all summer long. You can see them out on prairie lakes quite often. Right now, they're on the Bow River. In fact, if I was to just watch for a few minutes, I'd probably see the gull swing by. They are fly catchers, and when the rivers and the ponds are releasing their nymphs of dragonflies, damselflies, stoneflies, these guys are there ready and willing. They're often also seen following tractors in the farmer's fields.
Yeah, especially in the spring. Yeah, they have a beautiful pink underside.
Yes, they do.
Next, belted kingfisher, and this one's a female because she has the belt across her chest.
That's right. We call it the bra. And actually, Joe, you know, I've always been intrigued with kingfishers. I've always loved them. I love their attitude. I love their flight. I love their call. To watch them fish is a thing of remarkable beauty. Years ago, when I was a young naturalist working in southern BC, I actually dug a hole into the steep bank of a river because there was a kingfisher hole a couple of meters away. And I dug in and made a blind. I hung a towel or a blanket in front. I set up a flash system, and I actually photographed these guys. They actually nest in the banks of the river and will dig a hole as far as 2 meters in to build their little nest. And to watch the kingfisher fly into that nest, and I was lucky enough to get one photograph with the feet out and the wings out, ready to land. A very, very special bird. So they bring back lots of memories for me.
And fossil evidence dates them back about 600,000 years. So they've been with us for a long time. And next you have Sora rail, which Brian mentioned earlier is more like the coot that we saw. The Sora rail you'll always hear in your marshes, but you'll rarely see them. They're one of the most elusive birds in the world to get a photograph of. And then the other is the black-net stilt. You'll see them out in your marshes and your countryside running along the top of the water. Yeah. Brian, you want to add anything on any of those?
Well, the Sora rail, I used to call them the undercover agent of the marsh. You always hear them. They're the ones that go. They've got a very loud call. Or Sora, Sora. So but then try to find them, and it's tricky. But they build a nest and lay in a ridiculous number of eggs. I think it's about a dozen eggs, and somehow manage to hatch them all off. And the stilt, of course, you would expect to see a bird like that in Africa, but here they are in Alberta.
Yeah, and the Sora, little are known about them. I think we were talking once, and that they'll just disappear one night under the cover of darkness and migrate. They'll just be, when they're done, they just disappear one night in the cover of a moonless night. They'll disappear into the darkness, and see them next spring.
I've actually heard Soras flying overhead in the middle of the night.
So I have the marble godwit, which was the first for me this year, which I saw out by Towfield. And then Brian can tell us about the American AVOCET.
Yeah, again, these both birds, shorebirds with long legs, unique bills, interesting animals. I remember once in my motorcycle days when I was driving from Manitoba to Alberta, I was just this side of Brooks in the evening, and the evening sun was low on the horizon, and I saw a flock of marbled godwits flying over, and all of a sudden one came spiraling down. And as I was watching it spiral down, I thought it must be a mating dance. But no, Joe, it had actually collided with another marbled godwit. So birds do make mistakes now and again, because I stopped and picked up the bird and it had a compound fracture of the humerus. The American AVOCET is one of the prettiest birds around. They've got a unique courtship, which I witnessed for the first time just this last spring. We came across at Frank Lake, we came across a group of about 100 or so AVOCETs. They had obviously just migrated in. Testosterone must have been high. Courtship was going on. I saw one male approach a female, and she put her bill down low towards the water. The male did this interesting courtship with her, eventually mounted her, bred her, hopped off, and then they walked away with a stiff-legged gait, bill crossed with bill. It actually reminded me of some of the very complex nuptial behaviors that you see in some of the cranes, like the whooping crane, and yet here it is with the American AVOCET. Wonderful, wonderful bird.
Okay, and next is something you wouldn't expect that you'd find in Alberta. And until about 10 years ago, there was none of them in Alberta. And then about the last 5 to 10 years, they started showing up in Frank Lake, south of Calgary. And then about 3 years ago, the first 2 arrived in the Towfield area. And this year, I heard outside and north of Edmonton as many as a dozen. So the climate has changed and marshland has opened up. These absolutely stunning, and they do look that color, bird has made its way from the southern US farther and farther north to look for habitat and food.
Yeah, you feel like you should be in Florida when you're looking at one of these guys. Honestly, Joe, you captured it so beautifully. You have to have the light just right to capture it the way you did. But they are very obvious when you see them. My wife and I were just down at Frank Lake about a week and a half ago. We saw 30 or 40 of them, sometimes along the edge of Frank Lake itself, and other times we saw them in farmers' fields picking off insects.
Yeah. Probably our most prehistoric looking bird around is the double-crested cormorant with its beautiful gem blue sapphire eyes. And until a few weeks ago when I took this photo, I did not realize how beautiful their wing patterns are. They're just a stunning bird.
Now, again, Joe, you captured it beautifully, and you wouldn't get that under normal lighting conditions. The light must have been very low, or perhaps a slightly overcast day or something. It's amazing, actually. But the cormorants are interesting birds. You know, they were not listed under the protected International Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1917 because the fishermen argued that since they eat fish, they should be kept off the list so that they could be hunted, and so the fishermen wouldn't have to compete with a bird. Then studies were done, and eventually they figured out that these birds are eating a lot of the birds that fishermen have no interest in, or eating a lot of the fish that fishermen have no interest in. So they've been protected, and they've been coming back in large numbers ever since. They're a unique bird. I see them on the Bow River all the time. Joe, I'm sure you see them on the South Saskatchewan River. We certainly were seeing them up in Lesser Slave Lake and Cold Lake this last week.
And as Brian and I were talking about beforehand, you'll often see them standing on the shore with their wings completely out, either drying themselves or now believed to be heating themselves with these giant thermal black blankets that they have for these huge wingspans.
Yeah, that's one of the theories. Maybe it's not just to dry, because they don't have the same oils that other birds do. These guys need to be able to be neutrally buoyant in the water so they can pursue their fish under the water. So they don't have the oils in their feathers. And so they've always assumed that holding the wings out was to dry those feathers, and that's probably mostly what they're doing. But some theories have been put forward that maybe those wings are used as solar collectors to help warm the bird up.
Next, when we started, we talked about that Alberta has some 100 and I can't remember, it was 130 species of birds that are vagrants, or they kind of wander through. The next is an example of a vagrant bird. It's not regular here. I took this in Jasper just as the ice was clearing off one of the lakes. They pass through in migration. They'll stop over for a rest, and then they continue to the Arctic. They're an ocean bird, right? So.
Yeah, these are a deep sea or a deep water diver bird. They feed on crustaceans and such, and you see them usually on the west coast. So to see one in Alberta, that was a good sighting, Joe, and good for you for capturing it. I've seen white-winged scoters in places like Elkwater. There are several different species of scoters, but we don't very often see them in Alberta, that's for sure.
Yeah, and this is a male, if anyone's curious. So we're going to go on to our last subject. I know we're going long, but hopefully you don't mind. We've got large birds and the raptors. So everybody's seen a great blue heron, an absolutely stunningly giant, tall bird who will eat almost anything that they can get in that bill.
Yeah, you know, Joe, there's a friend of mine in British Columbia who's been studying great blue heron rookeries for decades, and she has been watching just over 40 rookeries since, well, for the last 30 or 35 years. And what she's found is that as the bald eagle population has grown and come back from low numbers, it's actually negatively affected the great blue heron population, because bald eagles now will often set up a nest close to a heron rookery. And whenever the bald eagle feels like having some takeout chicken, it flies next door and helps itself to a chick. And that's created quite a problem. Some of the rookeries haven't produced a successful chick for quite a number of years.
Next is the fascinating sandhill crane. I have been lucky the last 2 or 3 years to be in the right place at the right time. Usually in just as the snow's clearing off the land, they'll start arriving by the thousands around the Forestburg, Hanna area. You drive and you'll find them, and they're doing their mating dances. They're preparing. They do their mating dances, and then they continue they feed up on what grain's left on the fields, and then they head north to have their young, and they're absolutely a fascinating bird to watch. It's unfortunate that we think we should hunt them now in this province. I can't imagine they'd be good eating. But I don't know if you want to add anything about the crane before we go on to the next video.
Well, actually, I'll just start by saying that the sandhill crane is just one of the most stunning Alberta birds. And Joe, you live in part of the province where you have fairly easy access to seeing good numbers of them during their migration. I was in Waterton last year, and there's a couple of nesting pair down just on this side of Waterton, just in the foothills. And it's very exciting to see them. They're a beautiful bird. Now, years ago, I was wanting to see whooping cranes, and I was in Saskatchewan, and I went to Last Mountain Lake north of Regina to look for whooping cranes, and we were looking for populations of sandhills, scanning hundreds of sandhill, thousands of sandhill cranes to look for that one white bird. And here's the video I want to show you that relates to that. Ever since I was ever since I was a young bird watcher, I've wanted to see whooping cranes. And when I started working at the Calgary Zoo, it was very exciting that we started into the breeding of whooping cranes. So this is Alan Schultz. He's now long retired, but he's the guy that set up our crane dominiums, as we like to call it. They were 10 crane pens, and this is a profit margin in the whooping crane world. And they're being raised by volunteers dressed in sheets that look like a whooping crane costume. Whooping cranes are pretty. I never said they were really bright, but the idea is to create wild whooping cranes that can be released into the wild. And we were part of that program that started years ago when I used to work at the zoo. And this is one of the whooping cranes that was superfluous to the population, the breeding population. We had this one on exhibit at the Calgary Zoo. South of the Calgary Zoo, we had 20 whooping cranes in 10 pens. And I had the opportunity to go to a place in Florida a number of years ago where we had just started releasing whooping cranes into the wild. And I found a pair in the wild. And this is the first whooping crane that I had ever seen in the wild, which is a bird watcher's dream. These are birds that have been captive raised but released. You can see there was a radio transmitter on the leg of that bird, and there's colored collars on the legs so that they can be identified from a distance. Volunteers would follow the whooping cranes and chase them up into trees every night so that they wouldn't be eaten by bobcats. They had to be actually taught to develop an anti-predator strategy. But this is on a lake in Florida that is known for its bass fishing near Orlando. And scientists said that whooping cranes would never get along with any people, but here's the exact proof that they can get along. Look at the two fishermen in the background. There they are standing fishing for bass, and right in the foreground is one of the rarest birds in the world, and these guys don't even notice. But check out what the guy in the boat is doing. Think of this, any of you fishermen watching this video, somebody may be videotaping you doing that out in the boat. But here we are now. This is where it gets exciting, because this was the morning that I saw the whooping cranes first, and not only did I see them, but I saw them mating. And I'm going to show you that video now. Joe, I guess we could say that we're going to be ending this whole show with a bit of a bang here. These whooping cranes coming together, and look at this. I'm going to now just be quiet, and I'm going to let you watch in this magical moments. I don't know about you, but that fills me full of satisfaction. It's called a twinkle kiss. I know it's fast, but what you've missed is the courtship and the dance that happens prior to that. I know it's like a Gretzky goal. It happens fast, so I decided to put it in again for you to witness one more time. I had a flat top fence post that I could rest my video camera on. That's why the video is so stable. And look at this. Now, for those of you taking notes, that's called a post-copulation nuptial pair bonding call. You may want to explain that to your kids tonight at dinner. And there's the whooping cranes flying away. And Joe, you know, the wonderful story behind that is that in the 1920s, there was only about 20 or 22, 23 whooping cranes left on the planet. Now, as of last year, or at least the most recent statistics I could find, about 550 birds. So they're still at a razor blade edge near extinction, but what a wonderful story.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great video. And I'll add about the sandhill cranes. If anyone's ever interested, look up Platte River, Nebraska. Even Jane Goodall takes time out of her schedule every year. She goes down to Platte River, Nebraska. You have to book early to go. It's on my list to make one day when we're allowed to travel again. You go in late March, early April, I believe, and you sit on the blinds. You book a blind, you sit and watch up to 1 million birds migrate through the Platte River deltas, and you see about 600,000 sandhill cranes take flight. The videos are stunning, so I would add that. Yeah, we're going to try to go through. We're going to have to speed up, Brian. So we're going to through some of these quick. I don't think a lot of people expect to see these in Alberta, but the turkey vulture is becoming more and more prevalent and farther north. So
when I first started as a young naturalist, it was a rare sight to see them, but now we see them. There was even some spotted in Calgary this spring.
And you can find these, most common for me is west east of Edmonton. You'll find them out in the dry prairie. Osprey, Brian showed a video earlier of the osprey. One of the most efficient fishing birds. And you'll never, I have yet to see a picture of an osprey flying holding the fish the wrong way. It's always head forward. They will adjust it mid-flight after they catch it for aerodynamics so that the head is facing forward.
Yeah, another success story too, Joe. They were nearly extinct, but once we got rid of DDT, their population started to come back.
Yeah. So everyone's seen a red-tailed hawk. They line, you see them on the lamp posts, on the fence posts of your farm fields. I'm shocked at how hard it is to get a good picture of a red-tailed. They're so shy, absolutely shy.
It's a beautiful, beautiful shot though, Joe.
Next is the Harlan's red-tail, which I didn't know existed till last year when I took this picture and submitted it to someone. So it's the rarest of the subspecies of red-tails. Probably less than 1% of the red-tails are actually Harlan's. They're more of a northern BC, Alaska, Yukon bird. So this guy was in the fall migrating through. And I learned yesterday when I was at something that we will be showing at the end of the presentation, that there is a move afoot to make these their own species of bird, as they've done more and more genetics and studying of these, that they are not really, they're a red tail, but not really a red tail. They're their own species of bird. Rough-legged, you'll often heard them called a roughie. The beautiful Swainson's hawk.
Fabulous photo, Joe.
Bald eagle. I didn't realize they were so prevalent in Alberta, and you'll see them all year round. They stay, if they've got good hunting, they can stay like in Calgary on the Bow or Edmonton, the North Saskatchewan River. There's open water and there's ducks to be picked off. You know, there's going to be a bald eagle around.
Yeah, in the wintertime, now and again, we see them fly down the Bow with a mallard duck in their talons.
They don't get their white head until about the age of 5. That's when they reach sexual maturity. So before then, they don't breed, which is really, most birds are like, I think it's right away the next year they're in breeding mode. So these guys wait a while. They're a long-lived 35+ year bird in the wild. The record nest size, if you look it up, there's a picture of it online. Their nest, they'll go back to the same nest every year and use the same nest, and they add to it every year. So the biggest one is a diameter of 2.1 meters by 6 meters tall, weighing, I think it was 1,500 pounds when the tree finally fell over. It's crazy, but yeah. Good obviously good engineers. The northern hawk owl, part hawk, part owl, no one really knows. Fierce little, probably size of crow type owl, hawk. Extremely rare. I was telling Brian, there's probably only a couple 100,000 that they know of in the world, mostly in our part of the world.
They're really they're a boreal forest owl, aren't they, Joe?
Yeah, and you have to look long and hard to find one. Little is known. There's probably, I think I read one of the least studied birds in the world just because they're so rare and hard to find, and they love burnt out forests looking for rodents. One of Brian's favorites, the beautiful barred owl.
It's the one that sings in the forest, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you?" And the eastern one says, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" But a beautiful, beautiful call, and one of the few owls that is a dark-eyed owl. They're fairly common on the coast. A friend of mine who lives on Denman Island has a resident pair that live on his plot of land that help themselves to his trout in his trout pond throughout the summer. But amazing owls. Some of their other calls are absolutely incredible.
Yeah, one's like a dark barking dog. It's and if you're lucky enough and you're in Edmonton on the White Mud Creek and you go late into the evening, you'll hear there's a couple down there you'll hear doing their calls. The great horned owl, which is Alberta's provincial bird. So you have a big female on the bottom right and one of her fledged chicks. And Brian, you can tell everyone what's going on with this juvenile fledged saw-whet owl. No, that is not a cigar.
No, it's not a cigar. It's an owl pellet. Everybody knows about owl pellets, but because of a physical and a chemical blockage in the gut, they don't pass all the materials through that they feed on. They actually roll it up into a nice little ball of hair or feathers and bones, and then they upchuck that. And to watch them throw that up, I had a saw-whet owl in my office for 3 years when I worked at the zoo. It was an owl that couldn't be released back into the wild because of a wing injury. And every day I saw him cough up a pellet, and it looks painful getting it up, but they look oh so satisfied when it plops out.
And I can report that pellet was a chickadee.
Oh, very good.
We opened it up after to see what was in it, and it was a chickadee, or what was left of a chickadee. The beautiful short-eared owl with its racing stripes. My best luck is Wetaskiwin area, Towfield area. About an hour before sunset, these guys come out and hunt the marshes in the winter, and they are amazing to watch. And they hunt in groups. They're not most owls are kind of solitary. You'll see 20 or 30 of these guys hunting a field at the same time. Amazing, amazing bird.
They're one of the few diurnal owls. They're out during the daytime.
Yeah, and so is our next one, the beautiful Snowy. This is a big old male. The whiter they are, it's a male. The females will be, they never get completely white. They'll always have that black and white checkered spot. A very shy owl. If you see one on a post, if you see one on a street post or a power line, or just keep your distance and enjoy it from a distance. These are taken with long lenses. They spook easy. They get really stressed out, and there's too many people out in the Edmonton area now chasing these birds from post to post and causing them much distress, and that isn't necessary. So the next slide and video is something that I got to participate yesterday. I was an invited guest out at the Genesee coal plant, just west of Edmonton. I was invited out as a guest to videotape and record something very special. The Genesee, one of their smokestacks about 200 feet up, you can find it online on YouTube, is a peregrine falcon nesting box. And about 1970, there was only one pair of peregrine falcons left in Alberta. They were basically wiped out in the eastern US because of DDT and other chemicals. Now, talking with Gord Court from Alberta Environment yesterday, we are looking at a bird that has completely made a recovery. And you can see the little chick on the left being banded. That's a friend of mine holding it, and the biologist banding the bird. So we have now 80 to 90 pairs of peregrine falcons nesting in Alberta. They will be, I think they have been removed from the endangered list, and they're going to be removed from all other lists shortly. So that was special. And then what happened next, I wasn't expecting. The biologist said, I need a couple volunteers. So me and my buddy we went out for the rest of the day and checked kestrel boxes on the Genesee power plant site, of which there are 50 or so boxes. We checked 13 of them and found one box with 5 chicks in it. And this little guy is, he was about ready to fly, so probably in the 30-day age. The peregrine falcons were 28 days, and they'll start flying they'll start practicing in a week. And I was telling Brian this before, and I didn't believe it, so I had to look it up. The peregrine falcon is believed not to actually be a falcon or a hawk or an eagle, but more closely related to a parrot, which is bizarre, but they believe it is true, and they're doing research into it. So I'm going to show a little video now. So that's the chick, and their talons are very sharp, being banded. once they're on their back like that, they're pretty defenseless and they give up. There's Gord Court in the background from Alberta Environment. He's Alberta's chief biologist. He knows pretty much everything, and he's the expert when it comes to most of the birds of prey in the province.
You can see her spinning around here. You can see her crop there. You can see her. That's the little bag there that they eat very quickly. They get as much food in as fast as possible.
Well, just pause that for a second. So what Gord was pointing out is you'll see her in the middle of the picture here when it comes back into focus. You can see her crop, which birds like the birds of prey have a crop where they store the food. They catch it, store it, eat it later. And her crop is full. When we figured out, because we pulled killdeer feathers out of their mouth, so Mom had gone out and caught some killdeer.
As fast as possible. And also, when they molt their feathers, they start with number 4 right here, and it goes in 2 different directions. And most hawks and eagles go from here and molt go that way.
So what Gord was explaining there was why it's more closely related to a parrot, not just because of the beak and some other things, but hawks and eagles and owls molt their flight feathers from about feather 8, I think he said, out to the tip. The peregrine falcon molts them in both directions like a parrot, which is a new interesting discovery that they've made.
You could never figure that out either. You know, DNA studies, and they rewrote the phylogeny of birds, and falcons are the common ancestor.
And there's a American kestrel, about the size of a robin, fierce little bird, and pretty helpless when they're on their back. He doesn't know what to do. And
the numbers are down considerably over the years, yeah. Really. Yeah.
So did you want to add anything about the peregrines or the kestrels, Brian?
Yeah, I just am very envious that you were out yesterday with them, Joe. It's fantastic. It was several decades ago when I was invited to go up with the biologist here in Calgary to band the peregrine falcons that were nesting on the old TELUS building. And we went out onto the ledge and had peregrines dive bombing us as we were collecting the chicks. And in those days, or actually we were looking to see if the eggs were fertile. In those days, they were exchanging infertile eggs with fertile eggs from the peregrine breeding center near Wainwright. So that's all been closed down now because the peregrine reintroductions have been so successful. But amazing birds and amazingly skilled flyers, and quite a surprise to hear that they may be distantly related to parrots. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But we're finding out new things all the time. It'll be interesting to see what the DNA results show.
Exactly. Yeah, this is the peregrine. I think it reaches speeds of in a dive of 200 miles an hour. It's an absolutely fascinating bird. It was a cool experience to hold both birds. It's absolutely something I won't forget. I only had my GoPro. I didn't bring my other camera equipment. They said I could. I just wanted to experience it, so I just took some GoPro shots. It was absolutely stunning.
Yeah, good for you, Joe.
And the next slide, we have a slide and a video to close on, then we'll take some questions for those that want to stick around. This is just a reminder of why plastic sucks, and if you're disposing of plastic rings and plastic netting from fruits and vegetables, cut them up properly. The next pictures are sad. The next two, they're from last summer. These two birds that I'm going to show were lucky enough. They had good news stories. They were rescued and were able to continue on with their lives. But you'll see the first one's got your horned grebe covered in mesh netting, and you can see at bottom corner there's a chick. It was still trying to feed its chicks and survive. It couldn't get under the water to catch, but you managed to get it out and get the netting off. And then in the bottom corner is a milk jug ring wrapped around a pie-billed grebe neck and caught in the bill. in a marsh, and it's the saddest thing to see because you usually can't help them. You don't have the skill to see, and it's sad because it's not what nature intended for them to. That's not the way they're supposed to perish. So.
No, another indication of what an issue this whole business of plastic is in our very, very complicated world.
So should we show your last video and then?
What Joe and I thought we would do is take you on an international journey now to finish it off. It's just a 3.5-minute video of some highlands of Ecuador in search.
We need your video or sound. Sorry, Brian.
Search of a unique grouping of birds called ant pittas, and how some of these tourist facilities have really focused in and.
Sorry. Sound, Brian. Sound. Sorry.
This is one of the unique places that we stayed at a couple of times now. I was here just this last January. This is a coatimundi. What you just saw prior to that was a tapir. This is on the highlands of Ecuador, a fabulous epicenter for the evolution of hummingbirds. We had one hummingbird expert with us. In 4 hours, we saw 27 species of hummingbirds. But some of these lodges located in the backcountry have brought in specialized birds like this white-throated quail, and they do it by feeding the quail at a certain time of the year. And this gray tinamou, both these birds you could live your whole life in Ecuador and never see. You hear them in the forest often, but they're very shy, very difficult birds to see. And it's these unique lodges that have created opportunities to display some of these very hard to see birds. But the cake is awarded to, or the prize that takes the cake is awarded to this place. It's the white-bellied ant pitta, and a fellow by the name of Jose comes in every morning at 7:30. He takes a few worms and he feeds the ant pitta just for 5 minutes. The whole show is over in 5 minutes, but this is a bird that you could live. You can see Jose's arm out there to the right. He's throwing worm bits out to this ant pitta. The ant pitta emerges from the forest, eats those little worm bits, and then disappears. At another lodge, they specialized in the chestnut-crowned ant pitta. Again, 7:30 in the morning, whole show lasts 5 minutes, and then the bird is gone. But the final one is in southern Ecuador, and this is a very special ant pitta. Feeding time was 8 o'clock. We got there at 7:30 in the morning, and this is the bird that we saw. That's the ant pitta first described in 1977. So 1997, that's pretty late for a bird of that size to be discovered, but it was an ornithologist that stopped and heard this bird's call in the forest. And so because we got there before the guy that comes to feed them, we had these birds to ourselves. That's mom and the kid, and we had them come out and spend some time. We sat under the rain shelter and just watched these birds as they waited for their feeder to come at 8 o'clock. And now the feeding only affects their behavior for 5 minutes every morning, and that's it. The birds are off feeding in the wild after that, but they've trained them to come for this protein burst, giving us an opportunity to see birds that you normally would never see. I mean, here's a bird first discovered in 1996, the Hokotoko ant pitta, named after his call, Hokotoko. And so these birds are incredible. There's a famous ornithologist there, and he was taking pictures. Those were the kinds of pictures, Joe, you would love this. Those were the kinds of pictures he was getting, and what an experience to go and sit with ant pittas. And you know, there's places like that all around the world, Joe. And when COVID is over and we're allowed to travel again, why not book yourself into a place? If it weren't for bird tourism in some of those places, those lodges wouldn't exist. The jobs that are supported by the lodges wouldn't exist, and in many cases the landscape wouldn't exist.
Yeah, that's an amazing video. That's awesome. Love that call of that bird. That's awesome. So if you guys have questions, please type them in the box. We'll be happy to answer some for a bit. You can follow Brian on Facebook at Great Big Nature. They've been posting lots of great stories and videos and everything. It's a great resource. And those professionally produced videos are amazing. And you can follow my photos and stories on Alberta Fur and Feathers. And maybe when this is all over, we have a question that someone says, when's the field trip? Brian and I might, maybe for charity, we'll arrange something once this is all over. We can do an Edmonton walk in the River Valley, and then a Calgary walk in the River Valley, and do some bird watching. I would personally love to do that. So we can do that. I think Brian would be up for it too. I think we could probably convince Dee too. Brian, does alkaline lakes such as the Red Deer Lake limit the type of birds?
Probably, yeah. There would be certain food types that would exist in alkaline lakes. I know in other parts of the world, if it weren't for these big salty lakes, we wouldn't have any place for these flamingos to go to. Flamingos go to these alkaline lakes because they're so caustic they can't support anything else. So there's less predator pressure and so on, and the types of food items that flamingos feed on only live in highly saline alkali lakes. I'm sure the same is the same here, probably to a lesser degree, but there's various shorebirds, I'm sure, that utilize alkaline lakes for the specialized types of insects that exist there.
I'd also add, there was a question earlier that I'd answered for someone online, but the app again is the Merlin Bird ID app by Cornell University, and there's also the eBird app by Cornell University, probably one of the leading research institutions in the world about birds. Those apps are free. Encourage you to download them. I'd also encourage you to get John Acorn and Chris Fisher's book, Birds of Alberta, which is in its 20th printing. I think the new release just came out, the newest printing of it. It's a resource to have for birds. It's good. See, got no other questions. Brian, if you were to choose, and don't say the bird that you're watching right now, if you had a favorite bird, like mine's probably the bald eagle. Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, because I spent 3 years in a relationship with a saw-whet owl, I'd probably have to say that that's my favorite. It was in my office. It was an injured bird. It was just sitting looking very rejected in the veterinarian clinic at the zoo years and years ago. And so I said to the veterinarian, look, why don't I just take that, and then you guys don't have to worry about it, and I'll build a nice enclosure for it in my office. I built a beautiful little cage that hung above my desk in my office, and then every evening when I'd leave at the end of the day, I'd open up the door, and that gave the saw-whet owl access to my entire office throughout the night. And I knew that he explored my entire office, judging by the poop piles that I would find in various locations in the morning. But the poor little guy couldn't fly more than a meter or so, so he could get back into his cage. When I came into my office every morning, he'd be sitting in the corner of his cage, hiding there, waiting for me. And every evening I would feed him a little chick that we humanely killed, that we would access from chicken producing factories. And I would put the chick in his nest, in his nesting box, or in his roosting box, and it would always be gone in the morning. And then after a few weeks, my office started to smell kind of funny. And I checked behind the bookshelf, and I found a stash of half-eaten chicks. So he was storing them for a rainy day, I guess, because he couldn't eat them all every evening. But a wonderful, wonderful bird to have. I got to know the cute little bird. Remember, these saw-whet owls are only about, well, you could fit them. I could stuff it into the glass. He wouldn't like it, but I could do it. The little downward pressure, I could keep them in there. That's how small they are. Unique little birds.
And they can have up to 7 chicks at the same time. We saw 3, and right now in Sylvan Lake, there's a group, a mom with 5, and they're all the same size as her. It's like, I don't know how that's possible, but someone said, Brian, there's a shorebird observatory in southwest Saskatchewan off Highway 1 that is remarkable due to its alkaline lake.
Oh, very good.
Something for us to go explore.
Yeah, you bet. No, I don't know of that one. That's very good. I was just in Saskatchewan last year at the Grasslands National Park. and some of the bird watching down there. I was there in June of last year. It was absolutely spectacular. That was a place I hadn't been back to for about 30 years too. So it was great to get back there.
Again, the Birds of Alberta is probably your best book for identifying raptors. Is there another book on raptors, or that's probably the best one for these parts? The apps that I mentioned will help you as well, definitely, because all you have to do is take a picture of them and it'll tell you what it is. The difference between a raven and a crow when flying. My rule of thumb is if it's in the winter, it's a raven. If it's in the summer, it's a crow. Because ravens are...
Yeah, ravens are obviously bigger. They've got a slower wing beat. They've got a big round boat tail. But yeah, it can be confusing at times.
And if they're stationary and you can see them up close, the raven's bill is more curved, has hair on it, and their beak is longer than the width of their head. So that's, and they're big. Brian, I have a comment here from Craig Thatcher, who says, your canoe trip presentation that we did earlier in the spring inspired my son and I to do an overnight canoe run on the Red Deer River June 4th. Saw so many amazing birds. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that is fantastic.
We were successful.
Is the perfect place because there's so many bridge crossings. You can make a good weekend trip that's reasonable in length. But as I warned before, make them shorter rather than longer so you have more time to stop and play.
Okay. Do you have any advice for someone looking to gain more professional bird-related experience?
Yeah, there's naturalist groups in Edmonton and in Calgary. That's where when I first moved to Calgary, when I was 17 years old, I didn't have a license to drive a car, so I wanted to get out and about and look for birds. So I joined the Calgary Field Naturalists, and their name has changed since. It's the Calgary Naturalist Society, I think, something like that. But anyway, I was with the Calgary Field Naturalists for years, and it gave me access to people that were a lot smarter than me and people that knew where the good birds were. So I would highly recommend something like that.
Yeah, and the Edmonton Nature Club is one. Check the Edmonton Nature Club, when we are allowed to do it again, had monthly bird walks with people, and they bring in experts and stuff. Those, when we're allowed to again, I know like the Wild Bird General Store in Edmonton usually has sometimes guest presentations and stuff, and
That's right.
Just take advantage of those. The lake is called Champlain Lake, so we can look that up later for the Southern Saskatchewan. Someone else said there's another good app called BirdNet. It's for Android, and it also identifies bird calls, which would help me because I can't figure that out. Bird nest ID resources. That is a tricky one. A lot of people don't like to explain where bird nests are. There's a lot of gray areas around that, and so I don't think I'll even touch that one because Migratory Bird Act and a whole bunch of things. Disturbing nests is getting too common. Brian, can you tell us the time of year we can look for loggerhead shrike versus the northern shrike near Calgary?
No, I don't know. I've not, I saw a shrike this spring, actually, just probably 2 months ago. I was out birding. Ponds were still frozen, but most of the snow had melted off, and we had some very good sightings of the northern shrike. But, it's been years since I've seen a loggerhead shrike.
Yeah, I don't think they're that common, are they? Up these ways.
If I remember right, look it up on the distribution map, but I think they're more of a south and eastern bird, the loggerhead shrike. That was the bird. I knew the loggerhead shrike when I grew up in out east, but out here I think it's mostly the northern shrike. But I'd have to check the range map. You don't see them very often.
No.
You've got to be lucky to see them. But check out those robin-sized birds perched in the tops of bare branch trees in the spring before the trees leaf out. That's the easiest time to see them.
I saw the ones I've seen were in the winter on telephone poles, hovering in the late winter when spring's coming, and they're hovering in the fields. Someone said they've seen shrikes around Strathmore. That's good to know.
Yeah.
there's a comment here from Stacy that she says she's now excited to go identify birds now to fall. Stacy, I would encourage you, don't stop in the fall. The winter, a whole different set of birds arrive. And if you're in, I can't remember if you're in Edmonton or Calgary, but like the White Mud Creek in Edmonton, there are 4 or 5 species of woodpeckers that you will find in the White Mud Creek in Edmonton. The chickadees, the nuthatches, it's like a shift change, and you get a completely different set of birds. Not as many, but it's still fun to go out and explore. And the chickadees are usually so friendly and happy in the winter that they'll eat out of the palm of your hand. So and the nuthatches will too. So it's good. I think that's it for questions from everyone. So thank you again. I'm going to post this video both on our webinar things, and I think I'll post it on YouTube if that's okay with Brian, and we'll share it far and wide. And if anyone has any questions, you can contact me directly, and if I can't answer it, I'll send it on to Brian. Be happy to share locations of some of my favorite spots around Alberta that I visit regularly when I have time off or in the evenings to go look for birds and just get away from nature. There's nothing more pleasant than sitting in the ditch with your car parked, sitting in the ditch, listening to the birds and watching the birds do their thing. So, Brian, you want to add anything?
Yeah, in the middle of a Canadian winter, I long for that time, that third week in May, when I'm out there camping, hopefully waking up in the tent in the morning at 4:30 in the morning and having the birds singing a meter away from my ear. There's nothing quite like it. Yeah, bird watching is so much fun, and it just opens up another layer of interest in our outings that we do, whether we're hiking in the mountains or canoeing in the Prairie River. There's to be able to cue into what's going on around us just makes life that much more rich.
Yeah, true, especially at times like this. So
here
again, everyone, thank you. Thank you so much, Brian, for doing this and giving us your time today. Really appreciate it. It means a lot. We'll make it up to you later, somewhere down the road, when we can have conferences again. To everyone, have a great summer. Let's all stay safe and get through this as quick as possible so that we can return to some kind of new normal. So enjoy your summer and stay safe. Thank you again, everybody.
Bye-bye.